Why do Americans think they are better than everyone else? This is a question I've been confronted with many times over the past 4 years. Well, the answer is obvious, isn't it? America is the land of the free. America is the leader of the free world. Our values are superior, therefore you must prescribe your actions with what we believe are ethical or not. At least, that's what we grow up hearing, believing, and repeating. Here's what I've learned about our self-described freedom. It perpetuates a sense of patriotism that often, unfortunately, mutates into ignorance, even intolerance towards outsiders and their values. I myself have fallen victim to this indisposition, jumping to the homegrown conclusion that everyone wants to be an American, or at least live and work here without regards for the merits of being naturalized somewhere else. But I've been humbled by the opportunity USC has afforded me to spend my precarious collegiate years studying and traveling the globe with 40 other scholars from Asia, Europe, and the Americas. The World Bachelor in Business program at USC was formed in partnership with the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology and Bocconi University in Milan, allowing students to spend freshman year in Los Angeles, sophomore year in Hong Kong, and junior year in Milan, Italy. As a graduating senior in the first program, I returned home with a retrospective lens on the way my education in the US both positively and negatively impacted my perceptions towards the world. In navigating the challenges of my class's diverse dynamic, I also realized how strongly cultural values impact personal ethics and decision-making. So, as my program's tagline would suggest, over the course of 3 years in 3 universities on 3 different continents, I realized that I was able to learn more about other people's cultures and share my stories. But today, I just want to share one story from each year. So first, during my freshman year, I invited 2 of my non-American classmates from Italy and Germany to a California GOP dinner in Orange County hosted by the then governor of Texas. And as many of you might know, Orange County is one of the few red regions in this very blue state of California. And over the course of the event, a common theme began to emerge. Speakers were lambasting state politicians for driving out business from California, probably due to tax reasons. I mean, after all, representatives making remarks on both ends of our political spectrum is not rare in this country. But at the end of the night, my roommate from Germany, one of the girls I had invited, approached me and asked me if personal attacks in politics was common in the US, because apparently it was much less so in Germany. I realized that where Americans base elections around the candidate, it seemed that Europeans typically center public light around the party name, probably to avoid individual name-calling for obvious reasons. What's more, studies have also shown that Americans are more tolerant than Europeans of comparative politics in general. During my next year in Hong Kong, I faced the distressful balancing act of overcoming curves and classes infiltrated with academic integrity issues amongst Westerners and non-Westerners alike. But the attitudes towards cheating were different. First, the definitions of cheating varied across culture. Second, the motivations and purposed outcomes were different. For Americans, for example, cheating could range from plagiarism and co-working to copying and letting others copy. Meanwhile, cheating in Asia seemed to be a normal component of their culture. Where cheating in the US is an individualistic tendency to achieve an outcome better than another, cheating in Asia seemed to be a way to maintain fairness across an organization where cheating already occurs. It's almost self-reinforcing in this way. But when speaking with classmates from Italy and Spain, on the other hand, I realized that cheating for them was a way to mutually succeed, motivated by collectivist tendencies. They saw it as themselves against a system. So through my examples, you can see that practical applications of cheating can occur throughout all cultures, but the underlying reason is very different. During my program's 3rd year at Bocconi, many Americans faced an awkward awakening being inaccurately categorized by our European counterparts. In one of my classes in Milan, a brazen faculty member frequently associated Asian Americans with incorrect nationalities. All Asians were suddenly Chinese, and all mixed races were met with a look of confusion. This was the antithesis of the political correctness the Americans in my program grew up championing. I even oftentimes found myself at the center of conversations with non-Americans, comically pointing out how PC Americans are. And I wondered why. But then I came to realize that the homogeneity of European nationalities in both appearance and language was the underlying reason for their lack of need to filter remarks towards one another. Indeed, Americans vary so much in physical features and language that there's probably no way of knowing one is American without hearing him or her speak fluent English first. So to kind of explore the different value sets in my program, I decided to conduct a survey for the members of the World Bachelor in Business and received responses from 140 students out of the total 172 students. I asked 14 questions based off of the Hofstede typology and then 27 questions of my own to kind of identify more how non-American cultures in my program differed from American culture in my program. There was a wide variety and diversity of nationalities and cultures represented, but admittedly, most of the respondents came from countries where the 3 universities of WBB are also based. So first, I asked how hypocritical respondents found American culture to be. Non-Americans were more likely than Americans to state that American culture was hypocritical. So what this might suggest to us is that Americans do not hold ourselves to the same ethical principles that we expect from other cultures. Non-Americans were also more likely than Americans to believe that American politics was combative, which, given our recent election, is not that surprising. And then I started asking questions about attitudes towards cheating. So as you can see, I was trying to test my observations from each year where I learned through experiences. And I found out that 82% of Americans found cheating to be moderately to very bad, but a lesser 64% of non-Americans agreed. And then in case I left out some potential outliers, I further partitioned this data, and I found that 72% of Chinese respondents found cheating to be moderately to very bad, but less than half of Italian respondents found cheating to be that bad at all. I also found that the general attitude was that plagiarism was worse than cheating on an exam. And the majority of respondents also stated that they would be unlikely to report a cheater if that cheater was their friend. And then lastly, in relation to my year in Italy, I asked questions about attitudes towards political correctness in the US. Non-Americans rated this level higher than Americans did, which reaffirmed my observations that, indeed, Americans are more relatively sensitive to political correctness. But what was most surprising and interesting of my study through this short period of time was seeing that 2/3 of non-Americans and Americans stated that they believed Americans were ignorant to a certain extent, even though all non-Americans stated that they felt America's sense of ethics was higher than their own. So why is it that Americans come off as ignorant if we supposedly have seemingly high standards of ethics? Well, it turns out that while 1/3 of Americans believe that countries should not impose their own ethical values upon others, 100% of the non-Americans stated that they felt the US does impose its culture upon other countries to a certain extent. And so what this told me was that despite the fact that the US places a high esteem on ethics, it still appears intrusive towards other cultures. And ultimately, every respondent stated that they felt ethics was influenced by culture. So what my examples aim to illustrate are not the generalizations of the cultures represented in my program, but rather the idea that culture gives rise to different sets of ethical values. But if not one culture is better or worse, or more right or wrong, as cultural relativists would infer, then a debate is warranted on whether this relativism should prohibit any attempt at universality or commonality at all. Universal codes of ethics, such as in human rights, will undoubtedly come into conflict with cultural and religious practices. But the risk of applying cultural relativism to other people's practices is the corrosion of moral reason that allows so many Americans to look into the world and decry violations in human rights. Under cultural relativism, we can't judge other people's acts. It's considered futile, which perhaps defeats the purpose of ethics altogether. The shaky harmony of internationally accepted standards of ethics and cultural sovereignty can best be seen through applications of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It might seem indisputable that human rights should be universal, but there are still many countries today that exercise cultural practices that Westerners consider extreme or barbaric. So of interest to me has been the role women's rights plays in the argument between cultural relativism and universalism, because the dichotomy of male and female roles in societies forms the basis of many different arguments and cultural issues. Growing up, espousing gender equality through my nonprofit involvement with the United Nations Foundation and the anti-trafficking organization International Princess Project, I've come across many instances where a version of women's rights is defended on cultural and religious grounds. Social issues like female circumcision, female infanticide, child brides, and honor killings are generally agreed upon women's rights violations that are still existent in societies that have deeply ingrained patriarchal cultures. But if culture prescribes what is considered ethical or not in a relative context, then these would-be violations would then be acceptable, because who are we to judge? But it is my belief that women possess intrinsic rights and identities independent of their cultural peripheries, and this creates a compelling need for universal codes of ethics. But while there are indeed many universal compacts presented by the United Nations that are also signed by multiple countries around the world, unfortunately, many countries still criticize universal human rights as a tool for cultural imperialism and politics by the West, of which the US belongs to, and this undermines the merits and agreements for universalism. The process of incorporating universality ultimately depends on understanding human rights and cross-cultural differences of injustices committed from a community level to a national level. So where do I stand on this edge between these two ethical divides? Through USC's World Bachelor in Business program, I've been able to reconcile both ideas between cultural relativism and universalism. First, by understanding cultural context, we can accept that our own culture's worldview is not necessarily universal truth. And secondly, being aware of other people's cultures allows for more informed questioning of local practices that seem problematic and the formation of more inclusive universal agreements on ethics. It is my belief that the introspective lessons I've learned as an American need not be accompanied by a travel-intensive four-year program like the World Bachelor in Business. With USC being one of the most diverse campuses consisting of international students in the nation, it's possible to learn more about our own and others' notions of ethics through simple interactions with the global student body. We should not only seek out disagreements through difficult conversations, but also aim to understand the underlying why that founds our cultural differences. In doing so, and in challenging what seems accepted as our standard status quo of ethics, we will become more informed individuals and activists in our communities.
Thank you.